Evil human experiments. Alright fellas, let's start things off a little easy. Back in the 4th century BC, Greek civilization was reaching new heights. People were getting more and more curious about the world around us and began asking really important questions. What does that do? How does that work? Should I do a... Did I leave the
History.
How do magnets work? Call me back? Is this real life? Or is this just fantasy? Does the shrimp really fry the rice? Or not? All pretty valid questions for people just wishing to learn the workings of the natural world. While many focus on the mechanics of the universe, others chose to focus on the inner workings of humans.
It's driving me crazy.
And not only from a philosophical standpoint.
If you
Sometimes
exit and
you just want to know what makes us tick. That's what Greek physician Herophilus wanted to find out and document in detail. After getting his education at the Hippocratean medical school in Greece, Herophilus turned his bulging eyes towards the city of Alexandria, Egypt, with its big, throbbing library chock full of scrolls just begging to be read. Time to go to Egypt, he said, and so he did. Doot, doot, doot. After getting himself established and taking on a student, a young physician named Erasistratus, they got to work. Together, the two men would begin to carve out a new branch of science, anatomy. But in order to do so, you need some bodies to cut open to start slopping their guts around. And what better way to obtain fresh bodies than to use condemned criminals, captured and supplied by the Alexandrian
Wait, it
rulers.
still says it's not
Little
working.
Hero and Era were like kids in a candy store with a hopeful glimmer in their eyes, excited to begin their wondrous experiments.
Do you guys want to watch the Human Experiments history video? Do you want to finish it or play games now? Because I actually like these videos. I just don't know if people care to see them.
Surely the criminals put under the knife were already past their expiration date, right? Nope. Instead, Hero and Era performed live human dissections, called vivisections, to broaden their understanding
some dude who
of
like
the human
stole
body.
some bread or something.
They even went as far as to perform these surgeries in full view of the public for anyone who thought it would be cool and interesting. Wow, that's both cool and interesting. That's what I'm saying. Herophilus documented their findings in extreme detail, making breakthrough discoveries of the human anatomy. In doing so, he inflicted unimaginable suffering to his subjects. Since anesthetics weren't really a thing back then, the victims felt every cut and slice, at least until they passed out from the pain or died of blood loss. Dissecting intestines, reproductive organs, eyes, or even purposefully damaging the motor nerves to inflict paralysis. It was basically a big game of, what does this button do? In the end, Hero and Era's findings over 40 years of vivisections were revolutionary.
40 years of torturing people?
Especially since human dissection would be outlawed.
Was it worth it though?
Completed. It wouldn't be until 1800
Jesus,
years later
that's
that
so
performing human
fucked.
dissections would be a medically acceptable practice again. But like, you know, on dead people? Their work was stored in the renowned Library of Alexandria, but they were lost in the Great Fire a few hundred years later. Project 4.1 was actually a side project proposed immediately after the deployment of Castle Bravo, a high-yield thermonuclear bomb that was dropped in 1954 by the United States. Bravo was part of Operation Castle, a series of other high-yield nuclear tests with the goal of establishing superiority over the Soviet Union. The Marshall Islands, a remote Pacific group of islands, served as ground zero for the detonation of the nuclear weapons. Castle Bravo was the strongest detonation and surprisingly produced 2.5 times the expected explosive yield, resulting in an explosive force equivalent to 15 megatons of TNT. To put that into perspective, that is 1,000 times the explosive force of the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, Japan in the final days of World War II. Like, goddamn. To make matters worse, the Marshall Islands were occupied with citizens. So, U.S. officials
Wait, I never fucking knew that! I assumed they were uninhabited islands.
Bless you. Thanks, sir. Allergies have been bothering me all day. Must be the radiation, right? No, but seriously, are we gonna get those people out of the radiation zone? Yeah, you know, that was on my to-do list. Well, too late now, so let's just see how things turn out. Operation Castle
What
was
the
quickly
fuck?
amended with the addition of Project 4.1. This new section aimed to study the human response to significant radiation exposure. You know,
What
as if
the
tens of thousands of victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't evidence enough. Commander of the U.S. Naval Medical Corps, Eugene Cronkite, was in charge of the project and swore everyone involved to absolute secrecy because he thought the public wouldn't be too keen on the whole test nuclear radiation on
Well, were they
non-consenting
just
people thing.
not going to
Overall,
find out?
239 Marshallese residents were exposed to significant
Did
levels
they just
of
think
radiation
no one
and
would
began
ever
showing
find
signs of
out?
radiation poisoning a few days later. Symptoms included loss of hair and significant skin damage with weeping wounds, although the wounds did heal rather quickly. Immediate observations ceased after 75 days with the conclusion that no long-term effects were likely. But just out
Wow,
of
75
curiosity, random
days,
checkups
no
were
long-term
performed on the
effects.
residents for years
That's
after.
crazy.
Women saw increases in miscarriages
Wow,
and stillbirths.
75
and newborns
days.
that survived experienced developmental difficulties, impaired
Damn.
growth, and a disproportionate development of thyroid cancer. In addition, about 1/3 of those exposed had developed significant tumors by 1974, 20 years after Operation Castle commenced. In the following years, Marshallese representatives spoke out against the United States, with accusations that the scope of the experiment was premeditated and intentional, to which the U.S. officials responded, "Nuh-uh."
Damn, they got him.
During the
They
early
got off
years
the
of the
hook.
Soviet Union, it wouldn't be uncommon for political opponents to quickly fall ill with a strong case of the death at the hands of poison. In fact, it was quite an effective and discreet way to silence any and all opposition without causing too much of a stir. Well, besides the public reacting to mysterious deaths. And that is why we must rise up against... Oh, look at that. They got another one. So how were the Soviets so good at developing successful poisons? Well, you've got to run preliminary
Everyone's just
trials on
dying
living subjects,
randomly.
of course. So in 1921, a year before the Soviet Union officially formed, the Coma was established. This was the Soviet Secret Service's poison laboratory. Here, new deadly poisons were developed and tested on human subjects. Those tested were prisoners from the gulags, various labor camps built around the country for anyone who even had a fleeting thought that wasn't approved by the Soviet Union. Carry on. The ultimate goal of the Coma was to devise a poison that was not only lethal, but undetectable. It would be colorless, tasteless, odorless, and untraceable in an autopsy. Prisoners would be unknowingly administered various test poisons, which were disguised as medication. For me, if it isn't an orange Flintstone vitamin, I don't trust it. The various poisons tested included ricin, which causes severe internal distress and suffering, cyanide, which can cause violent seizures and heart attacks, and curare, a potent muscle relaxant that makes you painfully choke to death. In the end, the tests were pretty successful.
Man,
for
humans
the
are
Soviet
fucking
Union,
evil.
not for the prisoners. Research led to innovative ways
Meanwhile,
to discreetly
America
dispatch a
has
target
Arby's,
from
true.
deploying a cyanide
That is
mist
an
to making
equivalent
an
evil for
assassination
sure.
look like
I
a heart
agree.
attack. But the blue ribbon winner was the concoction known as C2,
A tasteless
carbolamine
poison.
choline chloride, which was basically liquid depression. Exposure to this sucker sparked a very curious reaction. Instead of a violent telltale "I've been poisoned" type death, the victim would simply become weak with a rapid decline in health, all while maintaining a calm and silent demeanor. Death occurred within 15 minutes. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russian officials have claimed that the Coma has been disestablished and abandoned. Yeah, sure.
The Syphilis
Now, you
Experiment.
may have heard about the
Oh,
Tuskegee
what?
Syphilis
I
Study,
have
which was an
not.
unethical medical study funded by the United States Public Health Service in 1932, which involved the study of nearly 400 African American men who had naturally contracted syphilis. The goal was to observe the effects of the disease when left untreated in African American males. Even though penicillin, an antibiotic cure for syphilis, eventually became widely available to the public,
Wait,
the afflicted men were intentionally never cured. Fucked up, right?
Why though?
Well, the U.S.
Why
decided
though?
to outdo themselves with the Guatemalan syphilis experiment. In
Another one!
1946 to
What?
1948, more than 5,500 Guatemalan natives, including children, were involved in the experiment against their will. with the Guatemalan government granting access to the unwilling patients in hospitals, mental institutions, and even
I guess this is the kind of shit people mean when they're like, you never hear about the bad stuff America does. Hi, Cheddar.
Intentionally infected with syphilis and even gonorrhea.
Intentionally?
Transmission was either done by direct bacterial contact into wounds or by sexual transmission with infected native sex workers, which were funded by the US government, by the way. The latter of which proved to be
They
a
paid
very
them to
effective
frick
method
them
of
when they
infection.
had
The guy in charge
oh
of these
God.
experiments was Dr. John C. Cutler, but you can call him Dr. Dickass. He often failed to keep accurate medical records of his experiments and instead would only provide anecdotal evidence in his findings, probably because he knew what he was doing was unethical, which very much sounds like something only a dickass would do. But all joking aside, the experiments conducted on these people were gruesome. Perhaps one of the most notable documented examples of what these people experienced was about a female patient named Berta. The following is an excerpt from that document. Berta was a female patient in the psychiatric hospital. In February 1948, Berta was injected in her left arm with syphilis. A month later, she developed scabies. Several weeks later, Dr. Cutler noted that she had also developed red bumps where he had injected her arm, lesions on her arms and legs, and her skin was beginning to waste away from her body. Berta was not treated for syphilis until 3 months after her injection. Soon after, on August 23rd, Dr. Cutler wrote that Berta appeared as if she was going to die, but he did not specify why.
Yeah, I wonder
that same
why.
Day, he put gonorrheal pus from another male subject into both of Berta's eyes, as well as her private.
What the?
He also reinfected her with syphilis. Several days later, Berta's eyes were filled with pus from the gonorrhea.
Why?
From her private area. 3 days later, on
What's
August
the
22nd,
point?
Berta died. Told you he was a dick ass.
Dude, that's
The
not even
overall
like
goal
for
of the study
science
was
or
to determine
medicine. What the
effectiveness of
fuck?
penicillin in preventing
Why are there
STDs.
cheese balls in the bottom right?
Dr. Cutler had allegedly finalized his reports in 1955, but no evidence was ever found proving that the reports were submitted for peer review or even published. So, out of all of that suffering, nothing of medical value was produced. Though, I will say in some
I thought this was
glimmer
gonna
of
be
fairness,
like
a treatment program was established by the United States
like
and made available
Egypt
to
or
the
like
affected
Rome
Guatemalan
era
population. But
type of
only
medical
half were
stuff.
reported to actually have received
This is like
treatment
surprisingly
with a
recent.
questionable quality of care.
Like,
United
really
States
surprisingly
President Barack
recent.
Obama formally apologized to the Guatemalan government in 2010, 62 years after the study was performed.
Yeah, that makes it so much better.
Yeah, that last one was quite the doozy, huh? Well, buckle up because it's about to get way worse. See
How
this right
can
here?
it get worse?
This is Unit 731. It was home to some of the most notorious and truly evil war crimes committed by the Japanese in World War II, which are definitely up there with some of the worst in the history of mankind. Unit 731 served as a lethal human experimentation and biological weapons laboratory during the Second Sino-Japanese War between China and Japan, which ran concurrent to most of the events of World War II. This nightmare facility was established in 1935
I've never heard
in
of
the
this
sub-provincial
either.
Chinese city of Harbin, 4 years after Japanese forces invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria. Inside, hundreds of thousands of Chinese and even some Russian prisoners of war were subjected to some of the most egregious and horrifying human experimentations known to man.
Oh god.
Experiments performed on men, women, and children, which is everyone. Those chosen for experimentation were dehumanized and referred to as maruta, or logs, rather than as people because the cover-up story for Unit 731 was that it was a lumber mill. It should be noted that the vast majority of the experiments in the facility were carried out to fulfill morbid curiosity, with those performing or overseeing the studies described as merely playing. A testimony from a Japanese professor who witnessed the studies was quoted saying that some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability.
How do you
of
witness
warfare
these things and
or
not
of medicine.
not do anything
There is such
or
a thing as professional curiosity.
try to?
What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing and studying beheadings? None at all. That was just playing around. Professional people, too, like to play. So basically experiments were like, I wonder what would happen if we just hucked a grenade at a guy. Bang. Oh,
Wow,
look,
science.
he exploded. Hey, can I go home now? Gee, I wonder if this large, heavy object will crush this guy. Yup. Will this guy freeze to death if I freeze him to death? Wow, who would have guessed? A lot of these experiments were designed to test the absolute limits of the human body. Tests included depriving victims of food or water to see how long they could survive, placing victims in low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped from their skulls, injecting victims with animal blood, hanging victims upside down until death, or even draining victims of blood just to study blood loss limits. Some victims were even dehydrated in front of large hot fans to the point of mummification. At the time of death, they only weighed 20% of their initial body weight. Perhaps one of the worst examples I've read was the forced pregnancy of female victims. The mothers were injected with various diseases and drugs just to see how they affected the unborn child, sometimes performing a vivisection, cutting the fetus out of the mother for examination. There's honestly so many more gruesome experiments that I just can't get into here, so if you are curious, I would encourage you to look.
There's worse ones!
Like, legit, really bad, so...
There's worse
By the end
ones
of the war, as
that he
Soviet
doesn't
forces
want to
were
say.
closing in, Japanese officials had all remaining prisoners executed and the entirety of Unit 731 hastily demolished to destroy any remaining evidence of the program's existence. The United States had discovered trace evidence and pressured Japanese officials into spilling the beans, under threat that they would be handed over to Soviet officials for trial and punishment if they did not cooperate.
Like, they haven't done
Once the
similar
US learned
things, what the
full extent of
fuck?
The horrors of Unit 731, all of those involved were swiftly brought to trial and executed for their crimes. Except, no, they actually weren't. In reality, the United States claimed that the data collected from the inhumane atrocities was actually pretty valuable, since it is otherwise ethically unobtainable through conventional means. As such, many of those involved were granted immunity and freedom in exchange for the data. The deal was struck, and the United States kept everything under lock and key. The Soviet Union, however, pursued trials against the top military leaders and scientists from Unit 731.
Oh my god.
In the
Sorry.
end, only
Had to knock
12
my stuff
individuals
down.
were tried and sentenced to several years in labor camps, although the United States repeatedly denied that Unit 731 ever existed. Oh, that was a bummer. Here's something to cheer you up. I'll see you over there.
What? Cruel execute. I genuinely thought that this was gonna be like, oh, like, they did this in, like, you know, ancient Egypt and Rome for all these medical advances that help us say. I didn't think it was gonna be like war criminals done within the last century. Jesus fuck, that was so fucked. Oh my god.